Hello everybody! So .NET 10 is just released and it's an LTS version. But boy, what a pain in the ass it is. This also impacts my Azure DevOps pipeline and specifically the .NET tests. This is Stef from Samayas and welcome to my channel. Well, I've already done a previous video about the issues I had with VS Test in combination with the MTP or the Microsoft.Testing.Platform. And for that, I done a quick fix and I added a global.json, and locally I fixed my .NET tests. One would expect that by just adding the global.json, that would also fix things on my Azure DevOps build machine, right? Well, wrong. Pure technically, if I go to my Azure DevOps build machine and I run .NET tests in the working folder, of course, it works now in combination with global.json. However, on a build machine with a build pipeline and .NET Test as a task, things are just a little bit more complex. In the current state of things, the .NET Test task doesn't work anymore because there's a syntax change. Secondly, depending on all potential previous parameters you might have used on your .NET Test task as an argument, those things like code coverage, XML files and coverlets, well, they were based on VS Test, and that doesn't work anymore in the current state of things. So, let's dig in and let's find a solution. So I fixed my Project Nugget updater by adding a global.json. I checked it in, and then I'm trying to run my build pipeline, and one would expect that of course everything would be okay, since the global.json is of course in Git and no problems, right? Well, not so much. If you look at the output here, my test clearly fails. And it gives me a very strange error now. Specifying a project for .NET Test should be via -- project. Well, if you can see, I'm still using the task, and the task is composed by .NET Test, and then the project it's building without the -- project. So I've connected to my build machine, which is also upgraded in .NET 10, and let's first try simply to run a .NET test on the directory where my test is located, and let's see if that works. And we can clearly see it's using a new interface, and here everything is working. So on one side, that's positive that it's taken into account the global.json. On the other side, that shows us that something else is wrong with our pipeline. And so, when I'm having a quick look at my pipeline, I have my .NET test, I have a task version, and the maximum for right now on my local Azure DevOps is version 2. And so I can't really change anything here. I just pass the parameters along, and then it constructs what it needs to do. So even when connecting to the online Azure DevOps, my .NET build still only has version 2. Nothing seems to be changing here as well. So now let's try to see if I can build a command line with all my parameters I've previously had and just some minor modifications and see if I get to the same result. And so I copied over the command line which was generated by the previous task and I executed. And the only thing I modified, because it complains now it needs the -- project, I've added -- project and then I'm executing it on my csproj file. And let's see if that goes. And unfortunately, it doesn't. So that means that simply adding the -- project is not enough. So now the logical next step is to simplify and to add parameters and just to see where it fails and if we can tweak it. And so the next logical step is to try test with -- project and just my project file. And here we have more success. Now let's add the release configuration and try again. And this one is working too. Now let's add our code coverage. And here it fails. So here we have the first parameter that is causing some problems. Let's try with a logger. And it fails as well. Let's try by specifying a result directory. And that is working. Let's try to add our code coverage run settings. And that seems to fail as well. And so basically, most of my parameters don't work anymore because I'm not going directly to VS Test anymore, but I'm going to the new test platform. And so some parameters can be tweaked, others not. And so after a lot of tweaking, this seems to be a command line that still seems to be working. Now, of course, in the previous .NET versions, I used to have unit tests and then code coverage via coverlet, and I used to publish those results, and now everything changes. And the question is, with this, what will I still be able to extract? So if you now look at the original parameters of our .NET test, a lot is not working anymore. Collect code coverage isn't working anymore. It was used for data collection. Logger TRX created XML-based transaction files. It isn't working anymore. The result directory to output the results of the unit tests are still working. The no-build parameter, since we've already built before, is still working. The vnormal, which defines the details of your logging, is still working. The setting parameter, which provides the run settings which you can create in your Visual Studio, is working, but the syntax has slightly changed. And the last three, /p, collect coverage, coverlet output, and coverlet output format aren't working anymore, since those are direct parameters to the VS Test engine. And so now that I know what are the parameters which I can use, I slightly modified and I switched from a star test project to a specific test project which I want to run, and I removed all extra parameters. And now let's give it a shot. And however, after having it run, it still fails, because the -- project won't magically appear. And so for that, currently, I don't really see a solution for the current .NET test task. And so the alternative is to create a PowerShell and do it ourselves. And so my quick fix solution is quite simple. And so my very simple solution is that I simply disable my .NET Core test task, and I've created a new PowerShell wherein I manually execute .NET Test with new write project parameters and all the currently supported parameters. And that should work, right? So let's give it a shot. And now, as we can see, our .NET Test is working again. However, my pipeline is a little bit more complicated, and after a .NET Test, I published my result, and I was also generating reports based on my coverlets, etc. And those, of course, are not generated anymore, and so they're not really working anymore. Now, to temporarily solve my solution, I can disable those. But if I looked at my previously working result of my build, I had my tests, I had my code coverage, and I won't have this anymore. And then after having tweaked it, of course now my build and my unit tests are working anymore, but I have none of the extra tabs. Even SonarCube, who was using transaction logs of the unit tests, isn't doing it anymore. So my build is working in reduced capacity, and that's a bummer. Well, frankly, this breaks a hell of a lot of things. Even with my Azure DevOps pipeline fixes, this still doesn't feel professional. I don't know about Microsoft Timeline to fix either the .NET Core task or make an update to Azure DevOps itself, because both Azure DevOps Server Online and Local seem to have the same issues. And currently, the only solution I found was just to run .NET Test as a PowerShell and not as a task anymore. If you guys enjoy this content, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell sign, or leave a comment down below.